Okay, I needed that sip of coffee. All right, let's go ahead and get rolling. I think people will sort of file in once we get started here. Welcome to the Direct Sourcing Forum Summer Webinar for 2026. This is our 19th quarterly webinar. If you're new to direct sourcing, and I'm not sure people are anymore, I think everybody's at least heard of it. We describe it as a talent architecture that shortens the workflow between employers and workers. So we're trying to take out as many functional steps as possible. Direct sourcing allows employers to use their brand to source both contingent and full-time workers. It also helps employers build an in-house talent asset. It's a long-term asset that they can use to eliminate duplicated recruiting efforts and rework. Basically, you're setting up an in-house staffing function under your own brand. In today's webinar, we plan to challenge the status quo a little bit. And for the folks out there attending, I want to encourage you as we go through our discussion today, ask yourselves, are we using the best approach to staffing right now? Do we have a talent shortage or do we actually have a skills shortage? And I think there's definitely some nuance there. Um, Ask yourselves if your recruiters are struggling right now to keep up with AI generated resumes and bulk submittals and candidate fraud. So these are the things that, I want you to think about a little bit in the background as we dive into some of the topics. Before we get started with the discussion, let me mention that we are recording the webinar. We will share a link to the recording after we're finished, so we'll send that out to everybody who registered. Audience members, you will be able to chat with our panelists as we move through the discussion. So reach out. Panelists, feel free to engage with the audience as the questions come in. And then we are going to launch a poll about halfway through the webinar today. So we would appreciate it, audience, if you would take a couple of minutes to answer our questions. It helps us shape our future discussions so that we can sort of stay over the target with what's happening in the industry. So let's go ahead and meet our guests. I'm going to go ahead and start with Karen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Karen Gonzalez. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for Honer, which is a technology company that sits underneath the Pyramid Consulting brand of organizations. So very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you for joining us, Karen. Archer?
Hello, everyone. Archer Smith, Head of Strategic Partnerships for AMS. AMS is a global provider of a variety of different solutions for talent acquisition, from RPO to MSP, direct sourcing, consulting, et cetera. I have been in the space for about 30 years, sat in a variety of different seats and roles, and very much look forward to the dialogue. And thanks, everybody, for joining today.
Thanks for being here. John?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm John Poor. I'm one of the vice presidents of enterprise services at Tundra. We are a global staffing organization. My remit, though, is focusing on direct sourcing solutions and strategic partnerships. So excited for today's discussion.
Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Tim?
Hi, everybody. Tim Rhodes with Raise, workforce solutions and technology company specializing in direct sourcing, AOR, EOR, technology for candidate validation, assessment, and supplier management. With global capabilities, been here about 21 years. Appreciate the invite back. Thanks, Brian. Look forward to talking to everybody here today again. And yeah, excited for the discussion.
Thanks for being here. Tim, just a quick note, raise your volume if you can, just a touch. You're audible, but you're just a little bit light on volume.
Let me see here.
And folks, my name is Brian McGuire. I'm a co-founder at Talent Belt. We're an independent advisory firm, and we specialize in helping Fortune 1000 organizations with their talent transformation journeys. That's into direct sourcing, and we definitely are getting a lot more into AI lately. So thank you for joining us. Let's get started with our first question today. For our panelists, has employment changed in the last 5 years? And in your opinion, how has it changed?
That's going to be an interesting start to the conversation. I got a few thoughts there. Hopefully the volume's all right, Brian.
Yeah, you sound good,
Find the
Tim.
button. I'll
Perfect.
lean in a bit. Okay. So yeah, I personally like I'd argue that there's been significant change in the past 5 years. And I would also argue it's not cyclical change, it's actually structural. There's a lot of factors that have impacted the workforce and how work gets done and how people engage with work. But when really kind of taking a step back and looking at it, there's, in my opinion, about three things that shifted all sort of at once, and at once being within the last 3 to 5 years. But the composition of the workforce would be one of those. And we're looking at approximately 70 million Americans that participate in the gig economy today. You look back 5 years ago, it wasn't anywhere near that number. But full-time independent workers doubled between 20 and 24. And these are McKinsey studies, so it can be validated stats here, not just throwing numbers at the wall here. But some projections by 20 to 27 are showing that nearly like half of the US workforce will be freelancing. And when I say freelancing, it's not just ICs, like we're talking about just contingent workers or contract or temporary workers or people doing multiple different roles within a 1 to 2 year period of time. And workers at the majority of skill levels, like top to bottom, are choosing project-based contract arrangements, not doing it as a gap filler or a must-have thing. It's actually a choice to go and do that. The second part of that is worker expectations. I think are reset pretty significantly in terms of loyalty. So we look at things like remote work has contributed, significantly to employee desires, and it actually matters more than salary than about 85% of people surveyed there. And career expectations have fundamentally changed. So looking back, loyalty is not coupled to tenure anymore, and employers have to earn back engagement and can't really assume it. I think that's a place that we came from, is that everybody wants to work for me because we're a great company, whatever it might be. But now you actually have to go and actively earn it. Last point is that part of our industry, I don't think is reckoned with this, but the systems and platforms and technologies that have been built to connect employers and workers, I think have actually driven us all further apart. Like there's just so many layers that go between the candidate and the hiring leader. And that includes, job boards and staffing firms and, all of us in this room for one way or another. ATS screening tools, there's aggregators, there's VMSs, there's the MSP layers, there's background checks. Like the list is pretty substantial. And that I think has become more of a gap, and workers end up being anonymous profiles. Employers become like just a faceless logo, from lack of a better terms, kind of being blunt about it. But volume scaled up at the same time. So you've got all this big mix of things that has contributed to a really fundamental shift in how work has been acquired and how candidates have been sourced and engaged. And the evidence I think comes down to a number of different things, but you just look at ghosting for one indicator signal from both candidates and hiring leaders. The other one behind that would be just the falsification of resumes and skills and that type of thing. And I think where that gets fixed is when you start to look at workers are making a direct choice or deliberate choice about who they engage with, while we're still adding layers, right, between the two of them. I think the direct source model actually reduces the number of layers and reduces the friction between all of those things. So I think, there is light at the end of the tunnel for all of us, but it does require a bit of a systemic shift in how you think about orchestrating your overall contingent workforce system.
That's a great. I'm glad you started off the discussion with it's. I guess it's not even controversial anymore. My question is, are we making it harder for people to find work? And I know the average time to fill right now across all industries and jobs is something like 46 days. That seems like a really long time to find a job, and it just seems like we could do better. And that's maybe a segue to our next question here. Has recruiting changed Tim, you mentioned some key things that have changed in the industry, but have we changed the way we do things, or are we still doing recruiting the same way that we always have? Anybody want to take a cut at that?
Yeah, I think I can take a cut on that. I think, much like Tim said, what has changed with the overall job seeker population, recruiting has changed right along with that. We certainly saw that lead up post COVID, where, really the focus there seemed to be generating applicants more so than anything else. And as we've come out of that, I think at least through the lens of the hiring organizations, it's really gotten about intentionality, right? So now recruiting is really about identifying signal, it's moving quickly, it's proving quality. And here's a point that I think is really important. The big brands are starting to understand that you have to create trust with candidates. I think from a hiring organization's lens, the market it's still difficult. If you look at some of the latest BLS data, 7.6 million job openings in April, which hires had decreased to 5.1 million. It was in that range. We found that nearly 70% of all organizations are still facing challenges recruiting both FTE and contingent labor. So what we're finding is that recruiting has really had to pivot to finding its footing with creating fit, speed, skills alignment, execution, and of course, again, that ability to build trust with candidates. To some degree, I think AI has accelerated that shift, not just from how it's enabled candidates to find opportunities, but name a candidate that isn't using AI to update their resume. And this group has talked in some of our meetings about how it tends to homogenize resumes. I think that makes the recruiter's job harder. They have to dig deeper. And to some degree, what that means is you're also more reliant on that personal network. I know somebody who knows somebody as being one of the best methods to finding a job and recruiting for people.
Hmm.
I will say with AI, though, I think, as the agentic as some of the AI tools become more available in finding and matching talent, where you're not going through big lists the same way that you were previously, it should be freeing recruiters to focus on quality, some of the skills assessment, candidate engagement, and hiring manager alignment. That said, again, there's that lens of the talent when it comes to recruiting too. And as we've seen in the market, there are certainly situations where organizations are posting jobs just to train AI, and that's created a scenario where talent feels like the process is a bit more confusing and less trustworthy.
Hmm.
I read Greenhouse's workforce and hiring report said something like 7% of candidates believe that the market favors them, and 72% felt that they were applying for jobs that turned out to be different than what was offered. And that goes back to why organizations now are really having to focus on building trust with the candidate base.
Hmm.
Some of the interesting data that came out of that same report was that 45% of all candidates use AI to prepare for interviews, and 22% are using bots to apply automatically. And as we think about how that changes recruiting, it puts more onus on the recruiter, one, to deal with the higher volumes of candidates that they're seeing, but also really to get that fit down while maintaining a relationship and rapport with the candidate. So,
Hmm.
from the perspective of has recruiting changed? Absolutely. I think the organizations that are doing well with it today, it's not necessarily about being the biggest brand or having the most applicants. It tends to be the organizations that are defining roles clearly, that can assess skills accurately,
Hmm.
move fast, they're consistent in their communication, and they're really good about disclosing
Hmm.
expectations
Hmm.
transparently and making sure that there is a relationship and trust building that's happening with the candidates.
Hmm. You made me think of something. My observation is that employers are jumping into agentic AI and chat bots, and I think they're missing the simple power of machine learning. Think if you could empower your MSP team with just a machine learning algorithm to match and shortlist the 1,000 candidates that you just got for one opening and say, look, I just want a really good algorithm to give me the best three. It's like a very unthreatening way to use AI without wondering what the agentic algorithm is doing in the background. You can sort of limit a simple machine learning algorithm that's very powerful to automate a task rather than an entire workflow. So, just I don't want to drag the whole conversation in that direction, but just an observation for the audience. You don't have to go for everything at once. Pick the tasks that are driving you crazy and automate them.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Brian, I'll just add to it before we move on. I sent over an article to you this morning that PwC had put out. And, one of the interesting takeaways is that the entry-level outlook for work has completely diverged. The sort of headline there was that the analysis of US data shows that AI-exposed entry-level roles are much more likely to require traditionally senior-level skills, judgment, leadership, and those roles have grown about 35% since 2019, while the other entry-level roles declined by 10%. I found that interesting because it's that two-track labor market
Mhm.
where the expectation is that AI is really driving not just recruiting behavior, but what we expect of candidates and how that affects what we expect from a skills perspective within the jobs.
Mhm. Mhm. So we're kind of edging into the topic of big data, like bulk submittals and that sort of thing. Has it become a big challenge, or is this a big opportunity that employers are missing right now? I see Archer nodding his head. Take a cut at it.
Yeah, well, I don't think my answer will surprise you. I think it's both is the reality, right? I mean, we've talked a little bit already about the increase in volume of applicants, the increase in volume of fake jobs or job. I mean, you think about companies who have a policy to post all openings, even if they know they're going to fill that internally. That's not an AI training job, but it creates a bad experience for the applicants who are out there applying for that. So with big data in and of itself, with the volumes of applicants, and you think about all of the structured and unstructured data that you have access to as part of a recruiting process and inside of these programs, it's a mountain of information. And I've been really surprised. It was really my experience has been up until the last, call it 5, maybe 10 years for some clients, looking at that data and trying to draw meaningful conclusions out of it and observations has only recently, again, probably within the last 5 to 10 years, really become a big focus of that. You have this mountain of information, you have no way of really sifting through it. On the flip side, that creates a lot of opportunity because more than ever, you think about all of the data points you have, again, as part of the recruitment and hiring and onboarding process. You know which companies have employees who are out there looking for roles. You can see ebbs and flows in terms of supply. You can see ebbs and flows in terms of where talent's located.
Mhm.
The key is really being able to strip through all of that information and make meaningful assertions from that data that you have. And I do think that's where, and Brian, I'm both a fan and an enemy of AI and automation and some of the things that are out there. And I say that just because there's a lot of fatigue, for me personally, in hearing so much about it and seeing people try to apply it. But this is one that naturally lends itself to it, right? If you think about mountains of data and mountains of unstructured data, there's a perfect opportunity to leverage AI, large learning, natural language capabilities to be able to kind of sift through that and identify trends. Again, trends in terms of where potential sources of candidates may be, trends and where talent's going to sit,
Mhm.
and also being able to read the tea leaves a little bit and shift in skill sets and what have you to really understand
Mhm.
what's going out
Mhm.
there. But
Mhm.
you've got to be able to strip through that and make sense of it. And I think that's the challenge part of it. It is a mountain of data, and you don't always have access to the right tool set to be able to manage that. And if you
Mhm.
think about the point solutions that are coming into play in our industry and related industries, you have a ton of very well designed point solutions for AI for parts of the process, but not really one large AI engine that allows you to collect data from all those different sources and kind of look at it
Mhm.
in a singular platform. So I think that's
Mhm.
another challenge too, right?
Mhm.
So it's both. Look, I go back to the days of keyword searching and databases. Actually, I won't even date myself and talk about the
Mhm.
fact we used to use faxes
DB4.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and use faxes to do submittals, and that was the
Yeah.
original VMS was faxes and timestamps.
Yep. Yep.
But it's a lot of information to work through, and without the right tools, it becomes very overwhelming.
Yeah. You just made me feel nostalgic for a minute, because it's just the irony of being around for so long that the industry itself started by trying to create as much applicant flow as possible. There was presumed to be this talent shortage during the dot-com era and the dot-com 2.0 and social media. Everybody wanted Java developers. And now we're at a point where we're saying stop. Like we keep pouring the pitcher of candidates into a glass that's overflowing all over the place. So now we
Yeah.
need maybe a different solution for the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that are going to even accelerate that further beyond,
Hmm.
you've heard some of the trends around people looking to freelance more.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a big fan of skills-based recruitment and alignment, but that creates its own challenges, right? Because
Hmm.
now you're opening up where you used to have experts within a particular industry, particular role. Now you're saying, well, hey, there's these 5 skills that are really important to this and that
Hmm.
can technically come from anywhere. Think about what you've just done in terms of the potential
Hmm.
pool of candidates. You've
Hmm.
opened up the floodgates.
Hmm.
So it again, it creates an opportunity, but you really have to be able to dig
Hmm.
through that. And I do think that
Hmm.
AI and technical capabilities play a big role in that. It doesn't
Hmm.
remove the human factor. But yeah, there's lots of opportunity and lots of challenges.
Yep, exactly. Um, So, Karen, I have a question specifically for you here. Do you think human recruiters can keep pace with AI generated resumes and bulk submittals? And the reason I'm asking you, you're our software representative today. So I want to hear from a sort of an AI perspective. Can humans keep pace?
So I am a recruiter at heart. So this was a great question for me because I really value the work that recruiters do. So for everybody in the audience, just know that. I think the short answer is no. And the reason I say that is, the short answer is no, because if recruiters continue to work the same way they have in the last decade, they're not going to be able to keep up. But I think there's real value in that human factor in the recruiting process. And maybe the question kind of behind the question isn't whether recruiters can keep up with AI generated resumes. It's whether organizations have modernized their talent acquisition processes enough to operate in more of an AI generated labor market. When you think about what candidates can now do with AI, they can really tailor their resumes. They apply to hundreds of roles and jobs in minutes. And the result is more applicants, but not necessarily more qualified talent. So now you've just created, I've talked to people that have received thousands of candidates or thousands of applicants for one job, and they have a talent acquisition team of maybe 3 or 4 people. And there's no good way to get through all of that without using some kind of technology or AI. So I don't think the solution is more, it's not more recruiters, it's smarter recruiting. And recruiters need to use AI to automate screening and skills matching and ranking and engagement so they can focus on what humans do best. And that's building relationships, assessing fit, influencing decisions, delivering a great candidate experience. And that cannot be replaced with AI. And yes, could we automate every step in the recruiting process? Technically, yes, but is it going to get you the best outcome? I don't believe that it will. So when you think about procurement leaders and contingent workforce leaders and talent acquisition leaders, it's the challenge is really filtering out the noise. But the opportunity is leveraging AI and talent intelligence and direct sourcing to identify quality talent faster and more efficiently. So I don't believe that AI will replace recruiters. Recruiters who effectively leverage AI will replace those who don't. And I think when you think about the future, it isn't human versus AI. It's a collaboration between humans and AI or human plus AI. And I think that's where you're going to see the better outcomes.
I think that actually echoes what John was saying about the Price Waterhouse article,
Yep.
the two-track labor market. AI is sort of the tide that's raising all ships. So I guess highly skilled people that use AI become super highly skilled. And the people who are just maybe sort of moderate to lower skilled people who use AI become highly skilled. So it's kind of raising the game for everybody. And again, audience out there, don't fear the AI. The news is largely hype driven by venture capital and marketing. But a simple machine learning algorithm can go a long way in sorting through 2,000 resumes in about 30 seconds.
I
So, yeah,
I will add, I do think that, I mean, it requires governance as well and a good
yeah.
process around it. So, in my own experience and when I was looking for work, There's definitely a gap. I mean, I was applying for roles that I was only qualified for, but there were companies that were allowing the AI, basically the humans could not override what AI was telling them. So in one scenario, my resume was not showing up well in whatever ATS they were using to search keywords or whatever, or AI. And I redid it, and she's like, it's still not giving me the score I need, but I know you're more than qualified, but I can't override the AI. That should never be the scenario. You should always be able to have a human in the process that can say, let me schedule time, let me move you forward because clearly you're qualified for this role.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
like 2001, A Space Odyssey. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
you're asking the
And
computer, like, please accept my resume.
I
Um,
just, I want to,
yeah.
can I pull that thread a little bit on the governance? Because I just real quick, because I personally feel this is very important. I think that also has to do with employee well-being and human well-being, not just in terms of the impact of AI to jobs and whether or not that's real or not. There are companies who are not hiring or letting go of people, leveraging AI as an excuse. And I don't think that the parallels are all directly there to show the direct throughput for that work. But I mean, even more than that, I mean the well, because I and Brian, you probably know where I'm heading with this. There's several studies out there that show the impact of leveraging AI and what that does on cognitive reasoning and critical thinking ability. And whether or not that's established or being established, I think about my teenage daughter and how much she uses AI, and I'm a little bit worried of missing that critical skill. But it does dull that, the best parallels that I draw are like spell correct, autocorrect, and Word. I used to know how to spell really well, and now I kind of rely on that red squiggly line to tell me
Mhm,
whenever I've
mhm,
done something
mhm,
wrong. And
mhm.
there's a direct impact. So I think that governance has to be extended out to thinking about responsible utilization and making sure that we don't lose, to the point earlier about the dual career track. Those leadership skills are developed by having to think and reason and do things. So there is a danger of using it too much as a crutch.
Great point. Critical reasoning is the basis for success. Adaptability, creativity, critical reasoning, and AI clearly augments that, but it's not a substitute for it.
Yes.
That's a very good point. So based upon conversations you guys are having with customers, employers, what are they telling you? What are the biggest hiring challenges that you guys are hearing about? And I'm going to throw that to you, Tim. We haven't heard from you in a couple of minutes.
No problem. I don't know if we have enough time to go through the full list of complaints, but I think just to Archer and Karen's comments, AI I think is certainly playing a significant role not only in our side of the industry but in our client and partners businesses as well. Everything from entering into the organization on the org chart to supplementing work being done to working with deep analytics and machine learning, and like there's just a long list of things that they're doing. But when we're sitting down and having conversations with direct hiring leaders, so the ones that are responsible for getting business done and product out the door or projects completed but have budget responsibility, it's actually quite predictable in terms of a pattern that we're seeing, and it's like they're not really asking about or do they care about HR strategy at this point. But what they're really asking about is why has my position been open for so long? And we talked about a 45 to 50 day time to fill. That's by the time the requisition hits our part of the ecosystem. Most of the time, a manager is looking for that person well before. So you could say sometimes positions are open 60 to 90 days before it gets filled in reality. And the cost is business. The cost is productivity. The cost is revenue, right? For that person to not be there. And in a lot of cases, there's a few different factors, but what we're seeing is not necessarily a skills gap. Because as I mentioned, like AI can elevate the skills of people if they have sort of the fundamental ability to leverage it. But it's a talent scarcity on sort of technical or professional level roles that just isn't being filled in the pipeline. There's a lot of engineers out there, a lot of technicians, but there's also a ton of new roles that are emerging where credentials don't exist. right? They're people are asking or being asked to do things that has never really been done before in terms of building certain types of machines and programming AI in certain ways. So there's a really interesting mix with skill gaps and technical competency or technical certification gaps that are being really sort of prevalent in industry today. And in some regions, we're seeing technical roles or postings outpace qualified applicants by a 3-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a pretty compelling argument, for younger generations, even
Right.
mid-career people, to recertify or reskill and look for that type of work.
Yep.
Time to fill, I'd mentioned before, but there's a business case or business cost to that, and that's just been increasing since the early 2020s now. So I think we're probably, I would say, even with all the tools and systems in place, but I would say we're at the peak, or scaling up still. I would hate to see it go longer, but that technical role vacancy time is staying open, and it really is a productivity issue. It's a project delay or even customer impact for those to stay open. Third one is, and this is not talked about often enough, but the retirement wave. In nearly every industry we work across, the experienced workforce is going out far faster than the workforce coming in can replace. And it's not a headcount thing at that point. It's institutional knowledge that just walks out the door, and they can't carry the knowledge transfer through a staffing database. No supplier can come in and transfer that knowledge from the legacy employees to the new employees. That has to be managed internally, and through continuity. The fourth part would be, as you see the increase in AI built resumes, the generated applications and platform gaming, they flood the pipelines now. So yeah, you absolutely need a technology or tool or AI to sort through that, but now it's AI against AI, right? And like, how are we figuring out what is real in this digital world? So there's that challenge to work through. And again, employers are saying, like, it's harder to find good talent, not just great talent, but good talent today than it was a couple of years ago, because the noise is up, the application volume is up, and it's just very noisy in that space. So you need human intervention plus technology to sort through that quickly and understand what it is. And the last point here is, I would say the one that underlies almost all of them is that an employer in our contingent workforce space doesn't own the relationship pre-work, right? That's owned through all of the different staffing firms, all the intermediaries. It degrades the interest of the candidate, and if that experience isn't good, they're only going to be there to get the paycheck until they find a better experience somewhere else. So there's again more argument with the direct source model, because you own that from start to finish. You're taking care of many of the recruiting steps before the requisition is out. You're getting ahead of those types of things, and you look at your talent pipeline as an acquisition, with that turns into a compounding asset over time, right? And as it starts to scale, the business is going to see a higher return off of that, as the dependency on the wide range of agencies and layers that are often prevalent to these programs reduces.
And Tim, of everything you just said, the thing that really resonated with me is the shortage of specific niche skills. Like, if, for example, the people who have not only the industry knowledge, cognitive ability, and match that with AI, we'll call it capability. It's very rare. Everybody wants it right now. Nobody has it. So to some extent, assessments, these people may not exist that we're all looking for right now. So then the next question becomes, who is the most likely to succeed in that role through upskilling? How do we identify them? And just by having a captive talent community that you can look at and determine who's most likely, and let's give them an assessment and maybe even invest in them in an upskill capacity so that they are a fit. So again, for the audience out there, you may have to manufacture what you're looking for, unless the universities step up the pace pretty radically right now. And they're starting to. This is not an indictment of the education system, but everybody needs the same thing right now, and it may not be out there. And direct sourcing is a great way to figure out who's most likely to succeed. So,
I actually talked to a
yeah.
company the other day and they were telling me that they literally went to like ChatGPT or Claude or one of them to say, here's the role I'm trying to fill. What types of roles exist today that would be adjacent or easy to upskill those folks into
Hmm.
those roles? So they're utilizing that to try to identify those folks as well.
Hmm. Yeah, good. Let's run this. So let's continue this discussion. So, do you guys think, and I'm going to throw this to John, do you think staffing programs in general are focusing on the right hiring challenges today?
I mean, I think it's hard to generalize, right? The right answer is yes and no, and the spectrum I think is fairly wide, but you see some trends. Most of the staffing programs that I've been acquainted with over the last few years, they're focused on real challenges. I think sometimes they frame some of those challenges a little bit too narrowly, right? So speed, cost, supplier performance, and fill rates, that still matters. But the bigger challenge is not simply like, can we find people? It's can we identify the right skills? Can we validate them quickly? Can we create a better candidate and manager experience? And then within that, to some degree, how are we thinking about leveraging AI responsibly to improve hiring quality? And when I think about direct sourcing in particular, it's that elevated candidate and manager experience that we see a lot of people turning into. We talked a lot about building candidate trust and having, I think, brand ambassadors, for lack of a better term, really are important. Now, it doesn't have to be direct sourcing. I think a lot of organizations are understanding that human component is really important. There's also some emerging trends that I think AI is really forcing staffing programs to think about fraudulent candidates, bad actors at state level. These are conversations we're having all the time, and certainly AI is facilitating, I think, um, more bad actors to have more opportunity. So what we find is that the programs that are really succeeding, they're thinking about all of those types of items. They've gotten away from thinking about process versus outcomes. That kind of delineates who's moving forward and who isn't. And it's always great to talk with this group because we all say the same thing, governance, right? You can't optimize what you don't measure. So I think, again, the staffing programs that are really sort of outpacing others, they think about, again, that those bigger challenges and then how they're going to measure progress against it. From our perspective, I think AI is absolutely going to help those organizations focus on the right things, but only if those staffing programs use it to augment human judgment, not
Hmm.
replace it. We still feel strongly that human in the middle matters for a variety of reasons. I mean, human in the middle is a great way to initially identify some of those fraudulent candidates, but it's also a great way to make sure that talent feels connected to an opportunity or a brand. They don't feel like they're being um, used versus partnered with, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so again, I think the staffing programs that win are the ones that are shifting away from that requisition filling model to more of a talent intelligence and connection model, better demand planning, clearer success profiles, skill-based matching. I think faster feedback for the candidate and for managers, that elevated experience, and then
Hmm.
having some form of measurable quality to hire. So
Hmm.
long answer, there. I think the shorter answer is it's a yes and no. Are we filling jobs? Are we building a hiring system that helps us deliver and adapt to the new working environment? Do we have governance? Are we leveraging AI to enhance what we're doing versus replace it? Really kind of sets the difference between um, a forward-looking staffing program and those
Hmm.
that aren't.
Well, I kind of love what you're saying here, focusing on outcomes, because we've become lost in the process, the functional steps, and we have settled for measuring what we can measure, and we're losing sight of the bigger picture in doing that. So I think it is this really the whole theme of the webinar today is to refocus what's the big picture challenge here? And are we doing the right things to meet that challenge? Or again, are we just settling on what we did yesterday because it worked yesterday, or it's because what we can still measure without doing too much extra work? So I like where you're going with what you said. And it's a good segue to the next question too. Do you think we're still over focused on cost savings? And this may be really more of a contingent labor question than a full-time hiring question. But I've always thought that excessive focus on cost savings has implications in other areas. And, so I think Archer, take a cut at that. I see you kind of nodding. We haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, is a short answer. I think cost savings are. I think if you look at, especially to your point within the contingent space, um, for the last memorable portion of time, procurement for the most part is owned contingent staffing and contingent programs. Procurement's goal within an organization is quite clear. It's to buy things at the best price and generate savings and all of the other value, throughputs, et cetera. Um, if I was talking, I was at an event in Boston last week. I was talking to someone from a pharma company. They have 6 drugs in development that are about to come out and hit the marketplace. If the focus is only on cost savings as hiring process doing that, and they miss their window to launch that drug within the time frame, you're talking about potentially $1 billion of impact on revenue. So it's the old penny wise, pound short analogy for me. Cost savings can certainly be a part of it, but you have to, there to your point, Brian, there are much more impactful measures that should be looked at. I've often said, for anybody who will take the time, 2 minutes to listen to me on my spiel about, because I get asked a lot, like, why hasn't direct sourcing taken off in North American market like it has in some of the others? And I think a big part of it, and what I always tell people, the most simplistic answer that I can give ties to this, which is in a lot of cases, it's been sold by the wrong people to the wrong people for the wrong reason and implemented the wrong way. And whenever cost savings is the big throughput that's talked about, yes, direct sourcing over time will generate cost savings. But to me, that's always been an ancillary benefit of what a really well-run direct sourcing program does for you, which is really ideally takes your employment brand out to market as an extension of your broader talent acquisition function and leverages that brand to build a pre-developed pool or whatever you want to call it. I know talent pools are a bit 2017 language, but creates a community of pre-qualified workers who have been engaged and continue to be engaged and want to work for your organization. What that offers for you as a primary benefit is a higher quality of hire, potentially better cycle times. That's not always important either. I mean, we have to kind of keep a focus on that and measure it and report it, of course, but cycle times aren't always the most important. But you're removing a lot of friction from it. We've talked a lot here today about the thousands of applicants. The model's kind of flipped, right? I mean, everybody up until the last about 5 years ago would quote the War for Talent book. And it's like, I think the model, I think everything has changed fundamentally. And the focus on cost savings, yes, absolutely can be detrimental. The problem becomes historically procurement, HR, whoever the owner of the problem is, or sorry, the program, not the problem, are typically looked at within the organization as a cost center versus a profit center because that's the nature of where they sit, right? But the reality is, and I just said this at the conference last week that I was at, the CHRO within an organization has the potential to be the single most important person in an organization. Because if you think about the number of CEOs of public companies who get on TV and talk about, how their access to people and all of that are so critical in their overall strategy, you can't get things done without having people as an organization, regardless of what AI capabilities continue to drive and can deliver. And the singular person who could own this entire strategy and really drive that within an organization is the CHRO. And by talking about things like cost savings on, cost per hire, and Brian, you said contingent, it comes into play on the FTE side as well. I mean, cost per hire is a big factor whenever companies are looking at RPO, whether entire processes or portions of the process. It's about how can we do this to some degree, how can we do this for a little bit less or more efficiently. and that's part of it. But I think having that as the singular focus, uh, CEOs don't care as much about that, right? Like there's, okay, great. So you save me a couple $100 on this hire. What does that really mean? But if you can flip the equation and talk about to the point of that drug company that I talked about, these workers, whether contingent or FTE, are going to be generating billions of dollars. And if you start drawing the parallels and say, hey, we were able to get this product to market on time. Yeah, maybe it even cost us a little bit more, but we were able to do it on time and we got it out there with a good quality and look at the net benefit that provides to
Hmm.
stakeholders.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it can be detrimental. I think it's become table stakes for, sorry, that's a set of words that is overused in our industry, but it really should be table stakes. Like you don't always want to drive up costs. Sometimes maybe that's the right answer. Sometimes if it costs you a little bit more, but you get a better quality output and you get
Hmm.
X fold revenue off of that,
Hmm.
does it really matter that you spent $5 more? Um, so yeah, I think it can be detrimental to other more
Hmm.
beneficial throughputs.
Hmm. So yeah, definitely. I always think of it as the cost, quality, speed balloon. And if you
Yep.
squeeze one end excessively, the other side obviously blows up. We could probably add user experience to the equation. But again, I think this sort of speaks to maybe a prevailing mentality that's grown up in our industry in maybe the last 25 years, where it's just taken for granted that every 3 or 5 years you put your contingent program out to rebid, and you expect to see cost savings. And we're now how many RFPs have we gone through? Some people 6, 7, 8 RFPs in the last every 3 years. So literally, there's nothing left. There's no savings left. And is that really the behavior you want to incentivize? And then also, again, I think it's a huge opportunity to put them back in the staffing business. Use your brand. And I would argue that it is a lot cheaper to do direct sourcing because, frankly, the staffing model is such that if you're not successful, you submit every 10 or 20 candidates. How many get hired? One. You still have to pay for the 19 others that you recruited. So how efficient is that model? That's a rhetorical question. Um, do you guys think that staffing programs are in general too reactive and maybe hindered by rework? Like, Karen, go ahead and take a cut at that. I'd like to hear from you on that.
Oh,
You're
you're
on
on mute.
mute. And Karen, that's a 25-cent fine for being on mute.
Apologies. Sorry for that. I would say the answer for many organizations is yes. If your staffing program starts when a requisition opens, you're already behind. Now, I definitely feel like we're seeing a shift and we're seeing some changes when it comes to that. But traditional staffing programs are really designed to respond to demand rather than anticipate it. So, as a result, organizations spend too much time solving today's vacancies instead of preparing for tomorrow's workforce needs. And I think when programs are reactive, rework becomes inevitable. Requirements change, sourcing efforts restart, candidate reviews are duplicated, hiring teams spend valuable time revisiting the same activities. And the result is higher costs, longer time to fill, and in general, a poor experience for both the hiring managers and the candidates. So when you think about direct sourcing, that direct sourcing really changes that dynamic, right? So instead of starting from zero with every requisition, organizations build talent communities, leverage workforce intelligence, and maintain relationships with pre-qualified talent. So when demand arises, they're activating a talent ecosystem rather than launching a new search. So
Mhm.
when you think about procurement leaders, that means greater efficiency and cost organization. For talent acquisition, it's a better candidate quality and experience. And then for CW leaders, it's faster access to talent and stronger program performance. So there's benefits regardless of where you sit when
Mhm.
it comes to hiring talent. And the most successful organizations are going to shift from a transaction-based staffing model to a workforce planning model using a lot of things that we've talked about today, talent intelligence, direct sourcing, supplier partnerships, and AI to really anticipate demand before it becomes urgent.
Mhm. Mhm. And I've always wondered, it seems like both staffing companies and in-house talent functions in many cases are recruiting people and then not doing anything with them after they recruit them. They
Right.
start from ground zero every time a rec gets released. And it's like, guys, you already did the recruiting. Do the matching now, stay in touch with the best applicants. And it just seems very counterproductive, the model that we all live with today.
Well, and I think in that model too, they're not leveraging the investment they've already made to source and attract candidates, right? So to your point, they're starting from ground zero. Talent has a terrible experience because it's much easier for most talent acquisition teams or
Hmm.
recruiters to
Hmm.
just post a new job on LinkedIn or post somewhere than to actually go back and mine the database full of millions of candidates because they don't have an efficient way
Hmm.
to identify those candidates quickly. So they just
Hmm.
keep reposting to job boards and it's just a
Hmm.
never-ending cycle.
Hmm. I'm gonna go ahead and try to launch our poll here a little bit late, so I'm hopeful that our audience will take a look at that, and then we'll kind of we've got about 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to see if we can cover about four more questions here. So we're going to burn through four questions that I think are important. And the first one we're going to take on here, I think, is a continuation of the last question. I think it goes a little bit deeper, but do you guys think staffing programs are actually competing? And by staffing, I mean contingent staffing programs are competing against the talent acquisition function in many cases. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And John, maybe take a cut at that for us.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we think about a lot in direct sourcing because ultimately, the core of direct sourcing is brand extension, talent brand extension. So my response to that is they can, but they shouldn't, right? So when staffing programs and TA operate in silos, they can end up competing for the same workers, especially if the market is really tight for a particular skill or just overall candidate availability. I think many skilled candidates don't really care whether the role sits in an FTE budget or a contingent budget or even on an SOW budget. They see one company, one brand, one opportunity set, really. So the better model isn't really competition from my perspective, it's orchestration. TA, procurement, contingent workforce teams should agree on the right channel for work, permanent hire, contractor, direct sourcing, internal mobility, whatever it may be, and have some governance there so that they can ensure that what they expect is actually the outcome that they're getting. I think in today's market, where openings are still pretty high, but the talent labor markets tend to be challenging. It's a tough thing to orchestrate. It takes a lot of personalities in the room to get that orchestration down. AI exacerbates the problem a little bit because now you've got a talent channel framework that allows for bigger talent communities, faster access, that broad-based outreach and review of candidates. So the best performing organizations that I've been exposed to, they tend to ask a good question. It's not who owns the candidate. They'll say, what's the fastest, most compliant, most cost-effective path to the right talent? And then how do we protect the overall candidate and manager experience while they do it? And then overlaying all of that is good governance. So, shared intake, having the right folks in the room and the right kind of visibility within the program. I think, again, the best organizations that I'm familiar with, they include TA or procurement and strategic sourcing as part of that overall governance. And when it's done
Hmm.
well, those staffing programs don't really compete with TA. They tend to extend their reach, give procurement better control, and to some degree, extend the brand beyond just the natural thought of FTE hiring.
Hmm. No, that's great. And just in the context, I said at the start we were going to challenge the status quo this morning, and I'm just tempted to ask the audience out there who actually owns the data. And in my mind, the organization does. I know there's a thought process now. Well, that sits in our silo. That sits in our silo. That's on my cost center or your cost center. Everybody would benefit from sharing that data, and I just want to share that unsolicited. That's my belief.
And
Let
I
me
just
ask
wanted,
him.
Brian, I know we're a
Yeah.
little bit short on time, so I'll be really quick. Just to pull, again, to use my overused word of this webinar, to pull a thread on what John just said there. It's not only the candidate experience, and John, you alluded to this, but the manager experience. Our data shows that the
Correct.
average manager, 85% of our users across all of the different, whether it's direct hiring, contingent hiring. 85% of managers hire one or less person a year. And you think about how frustrating it is, their experience on the other end of this, whether you're in that 85 or the 15%, human nature is to take the path of least resistance. And what ends up happening is companies have hiring frosts, hiring freezes, whatever. And then you see this ballooning in contingent labor, and then they start to control, well, regular hourly staff workers, staff augmentation workers are now also counted as headcount, so then SOW balloons. And the user experience is horrible. And by getting in front of the process, like what John's talking about, and also a little bit of what Karen was just sharing, you can really make that manager experience so much better. Let's make it easy for talent to find the user who needs them, is really what all this comes down to, because the
Exactly.
worker in a lot of cases doesn't care. The manager doesn't care. Manager needs work done. Worker wants to do work. Let's put them together in the least friction way, in a compliant way, to make it less frustrating for everybody.
Yeah. Shortest distance between the points.
Yep.
Exactly. I have a follow-up question based on what Archer's saying here. Do you guys think that to some extent legacy architectures and tech stacks are holding things back right now? And Tim, we haven't heard from you in a few
I
minutes. Go ahead
was
and take
just
us
I
away.
was really just about to jump in with this topic anyways. I think this is what we're really talking about is it's a legacy architecture that was built for something different. And you know what today's architecture requires is a total, in my opinion, a system redesign. Not to say that the technology itself is old. I mean, I think from a technology standard, you know, some of the more legacy VMS tools and that, like, they would be old by years, but I think they're trying to catch up from a functionality standpoint, but it can always be fairly simply updated to, you know, what the demands for today are. But really what it's about is what was it designed for? And it was designed to manage intermediary relationships and transactional compliance, with keeping a record of time and expense effectively. Not to connect, and Archer said it best, like not to connect a hiring leader with a worker who wants to work for them. That's actually I think the opposite of what it was designed for. And that's not a design issue. So that's like an upgrade issue at this point. And can we upgrade the technology to function that way? Yes, but I think the more important thing is upgrading the human behavior, and the broader design of what these systems and tools are built for. Because now you have a hiring leader that sits on top and a worker that sits at the bottom, and layer upon layer upon layer, right? And I think it's a three-way sort of a partnership where it's your candidate, your hiring manager, and the intermediary in between. With the intermediary may have the layers below, but the design of it is to flow that candidate through in as few steps as possible, with as least friction as possible there. And most digital communication tools, I think, make it worse, not necessarily better, with AI screening and you know, SMS campaigns, and like all that's built for volume. And the redesign is to use those tools, but to build it for personalized experience on both ends.
Mm-hmm.
And hiring leaders should have access to at least check the pulse of what a talent community is providing, or what the data says within that, as opposed to relying on another intermediary to kind of look at that. And you know, they may not be comfortable with what it says and have to change the message as it goes back to the hiring leaders, and vice versa. That can come back, you know, down to the candidate pool, and now you have just broken telephone, mixed messages, mm-hmm. and again, a degraded experience, right, mm-hmm. from there. So I don't think it's necessarily fixable by layering more AI on top of it. And there was in the McKinsey study I shared or talked about earlier, it mentioned that 65% of organizations use generative AI, like as of, you know, current state, but only 20% have actually restructured their workflow to incorporate that AI. Mm-hmm. So think about what that does, right? It's you know, you're putting, trying to find the right analogy on here, but like you're basically throwing more ingredients into the pot that don't necessarily make the recipe any better.
Great statement. I
right?
100% agree. If I could say this webinar has had one theme, it's that I think we do direct sourcing a disservice when we put it underneath we'll call the traditional or prevailing MSP staffing umbrella. It's not intended to be another step in an already complicated process. It's designed to sort of force us to look at the problem and ask ourselves, are we doing this in the best way that we can? Again, shortening the distance between worker and employer. Let's see if we could squeeze one more quick question. Do you guys think the risks from integrating those work streams, contingent and full-time, or VMS, ATS, if you want to look at it that way, do you think the risks are outweighed by the advantages right now? Are we afraid of something that's really not there anymore? Like Karen, we haven't heard from you. Take a swing at that.
I know we only have a couple minutes, but I would say the advantages outweigh the risks, and I will acknowledge that there are some risks, but I think, historically we've seen ATS and VMS platforms operate in separate silos. Talent acquisition typically manages the candidates for full-time hires. Procurement and contingent workforce teams manage the non-employment talent and candidates. And the result is this fragmented talent strategy, duplicate processes, inconsistent candidate experience, limited visibility in the total workforce. So by integrating these work streams, it really creates significant advantages, in my opinion. Organizations gain a more complete view of their talent. They improve workforce planning, they increase talent redeployment, which we've talked about a little bit, and really create a more seamless experience across worker types. I would also say it enables direct sourcing programs to maximize the value of talent communities across both contingent and full-time hiring. So when I talk about risk, I think there are some risks to consider, but I think that they can be easily solved. That would include worker classification, compliance, data privacy, process alignment, change management. But in my experience, the organizational alignment is often the more challenging part of this equation versus the technology integration, or solving for any kind of co-employment or legal concerns. I think, in terms of benefits, organizations are no longer competing for talent through separate channels. They'd be competing for skills. And I think the biggest risk isn't integrating ATS and VMS workflows. It's really continuing to manage the workforce through disconnected systems while your competitors are building a more unified talent strategy. So I think the organizations gaining a competitive advantage are those that stop managing employees and contingent workers as separate populations and start managing work, skills, and talent across the entire workforce ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So the advantages outweigh the risks pretty
Yes.
much. I can't even remember the last co-employment lawsuit. I want to say it was FedEx or Microsoft. It's like 20 years ago. So
Yeah,
I'll
it's a
throw
long
that out.
time. And there's all kinds of things you can do to mitigate any kind of legal risk. And there's never been
Mhm,
a scenario where we weren't able to work through that. So
mhm. So for those we still have about 36 participants out there, audience, thank you for sticking with us. We're going to try to take one more quick question and then we're going to turn you loose into your workday. So last question, how do you guys think employers could effectively share data between the contingent and full-time work streams? And I'll kick that over to Archer to close us out.
Yeah, I'll go off of what Karen was saying. I think the biggest thing is to have a plan and to collaborate. I think those two things, knowing that yes, there's going to be some uphill battles, knowing that there's risk to be mitigated, but start developing a plan and having dialogue and opening up rather than looking at competing forces. Know that the pool of talent that you're talking to, whether FTE, whether direct source, whether staff hog, you name the channel, is probably the same person, and they're probably having a bad experience trying to come to work for your organization. So have a plan, open up dialogue, engage with your risk department, engage with the lawyers, engage with all the people who need to be engaged with.
Mhm,
But when you're prepared to have those conversations, again, come with a plan, come proactively addressing those things, and saying, yes, co-employment is a potential risk. We have to, but it can be mitigated. Um, I think that's the biggest thing. Begin to steal the old
mhm,
Coveyism, begin with the end in mind.
mhm,
You have to think about what you want as an output and know that yes, there's going to be conversations, there's going to be things that have to have, but come with
mhm.
a plan, collaborate, and be open to input, and partner with other. You're not going to get it done if you're on an island. It just isn't going to
Mhm.
happen.
That great exit comments there, Archer. I appreciate that. For the audience folks out there, we can help with those discussions. Anybody on this panel, including, I think you guys even have legal capabilities too that you might be able to bring. If we need to deal with a legal department, we can probably talk about worker classification, co-employment, that sort of thing. So let's have that discussion. Anyway, to everybody, especially to our panelists, many thanks for spending part of your day with us today. This has been a great webinar. And then for our audience out there, please take a minute to complete our exit survey. Let us know what you thought and help us shape future discussions. Everybody have a great day and a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.